Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Queer Journal. The Queer Journal is a podcast that's all about sharing queer stories, talking about queer topics, and just talking about queer things that are important to me. So, welcome to episode 2. I want to start off by saying thank you all so much for the love and support that episode 1 got. I know that was a kind of a heavy topic to start out with, and this is a podcast I've wanted to make for literal months. So I'm really happy to see that people are enjoying it, and that people are sharing their stories with me in the comments too, because that's really important to me, and the biggest reason why I wanted to start something like this. I just wanted something, an open forum for discussion where I could talk about things and people could share their stories and create conversations with me. So I really appreciate everybody doing that, and I appreciate everybody watching. It's just, I'm so glad that I have the opportunity to do something like this, and that people will listen to it, and that people are here to relate or be educated or whatever else. So just thank you all so much for watching and listening. I appreciate it so very much, like more than you will ever know. So this episode is going to be about a piece of queer media that is very important to me, and it wasn't important to me up until this year because it was the first time that I watched it. Even though it's been around since 2005, it was the first time that I watched it, and it impacted me in ways that I didn't really expect it to. And I mean, I didn't really expect it to impact me in general because I had no idea what it was really about. But it impacted me to the point where I was kind of in a depressive state for like 2 days after I watched it, and that's not a joke. Like I mean, I was genuinely like depressed after watching it. But it is Brokeback Mountain, and for those of you who haven't seen Brokeback Mountain, I'm gonna put a major spoiler warning because I'm pretty much gonna tell the entire plot. And break down a lot of kind of in-depth things that are in the movie. And also, if you haven't seen it, or if you have seen it, I also want to put a trigger warning because there are some um, pretty intense topics that we're going to talk about, like homophobia, um, talking about a hate crime, and just general violence throughout the movie. So if those aren't topics that you're okay with, please feel free to skip this episode. Next week will be a lot later than this week. So please feel free to click off of this and not not put yourself through those triggers if that's something you're not comfortable with. So I kind of want to start with breaking down the movie in general, because if you really truly want to water Brokeback Mountain down as much as possible and ignore all the nuances and the emotion and passion in it, it is a story about gay cowboys. That's it. That's the most bare bones description of this movie that you can have. Um, but I don't do bare bones around here. So I want to talk about the plot of the movie and then get into its impact on me personally. And it had a lot of societal impacts too, but I kind of want to make this episode just about the impacts for me personally. And I do want to make a second episode at some point about the cultural and societal impacts. I kind of want to put that in. I might put that in with some other types of media, but for now, it's going to be talking about like the impacts for me and just talking about my emotions after watching it. So to get into it, Brokeback Mountain was released in 2005. It is a drama slash romance about two cowboys named Jack and Ennis. And Jack and Ennis are kind of your traditional definitions of masculinity. They're blue collar, out on the range every day, hard workers, very masculine, um, very caught up in not showing emotion and very stuck in the idea that you got to be one type of way and that's it, and they're just going off of what they were taught as children. So they're very much the stereotypical definition of traditional masculinity. So this movie's set in the 60s. It starts out with Jack and Ennis meeting each other. They're hired by a foreman, and they're herding sheep in the same place, which is on Brokeback Mountain. So they are pretty standoffish in the beginning. They don't know each other. They're entire strangers. So they don't really spend a lot of time talking because at night they have to separate because one has to sleep with the sheep and someone has to sleep at their camp. So they spend the first couple days not really getting to know each other. But then, of course, when you spend so much time with someone, you're kind of forced to get to know them. So they start getting closer and getting to know each other more and just becoming um, friends, really. And they just continue to grow closer and closer and closer until one night they're drinking and they are intimate with one another. And this kind of starts the development of their intimate relationship. And in the beginning, it's kind of a reluctant relationship for Ennis because he's very much denying himself his feelings. He doesn't want to address it. He doesn't want to think about it. He doesn't want it to be a thing. So he initially is very reluctant, but it eventually divulges into a very close and intimate relationship between the two men as they're herding these sheep on Brokeback Mountain. And things are going fine until the foreman uses binoculars and sees them getting a little saucy one day. So now somebody knows about their relationship. And this doesn't really show itself again, other than the fact that he doesn't hire either of them anymore. But this doesn't really come up later on. But this is the first time that their relationship has been exposed in any way. So after their time on Brokeback Mountain, they pretty much go home and live the lives that they're supposed to. They get married, have kids, work their jobs, and nothing else really comes of it. So they're apart for a few years. Jack lives in Texas, and Ennis stays in his hometown of... can't remember where. Somewhere. Regardless, they're apart for a couple years until they meet up, finally. Jack comes to Ennis's house, and they are just overcome with emotion, and they just kiss right in front of Ennis's house. And, of course, they're not being very inconspicuous. So Alma, who is Ennis's wife, sees it, but she doesn't say anything about it, and it's just kind of a secret until way later on. So from here, their relationship just develops even more. They see each other more frequently, but it's still very infrequent because they have to do it and pose it as fishing trips or hunting trips or whatever else, because they can't exactly be open about the fact that they're cheating on their wives. So the more that they meet, the more Jack especially becomes really dissatisfied with their current situation and just wants to go away and live his life with Ennis. And there's definitely a part of Ennis that wants this too, but he is a lot more afraid of it because he has had the experience of when he was a kid, his dad showed him a man who was brutally beaten and murdered for being suspected of being gay. And so this image is kind of burned into Ennis's brain, and he just is stuck in that fear. So Ennis just really lives in this fear, and it causes quite a few fights between him and Jack. So as their relationship develops, their marriages kind of fall apart with it, and eventually Alma and Ennis are divorced. And at this point, Ennis calls Jack and tells him that, and Jack shows up and basically says that he wants to elope and that they should, because now Ennis doesn't have a wife, and Jack's marriage is not that great either. That obviously doesn't go well, and they get into another fight, and they don't see each other for a while after that. And at this point, this is when Jack starts to kind of embrace his feelings more, and he starts to sleep with other men, and is not exactly hiding the fact that he is gay. So after this, Alma is remarried, and Ennis shows up to Thanksgiving to see his daughters, and it does not go well, because this is the point where Alma confronts Ennis about his relationship with Jack, and unfortunately, he gets violent with her and essentially just storms out and doesn't talk to his kids for years because of fear of being exposed and just the fear that Alma knows and has that over his head now. And after this, Ennis starts to see another woman, and this is the point where it's very heavily implied that Jack is somewhat open about being gay. Him and Lorene, who is Jack's wife, they meet up with another couple at a dance, I think it was. And there's just a lot of scenes where there's a lot of tension between the two, and you can tell. So it's just revealed more that Jack is being a lot more open and embracing himself more. And it's a really, but it's a really shitty uh, way for him to embrace himself, because it's just continually leading him to cheat on his wife and neglect that relationship and not allow himself to do it the proper way. So Jack and Ennis see each other again on another fishing trip, and it's at this point that Ennis tells Jack that it's going to be months and months and months before they can see each other again, because Ennis is not very well off in terms of money. So he has to work as much as possible, and Jack gets pretty upset about that. They argue, and this is where the iconic line of "all we have is Brokeback Mountain" is said. So then, after their argument, they part ways, and sometime later, Ennis sends a postcard to Jack, and it's returned, and it's stamped deceased. So Ennis calls Lorene, and she essentially tells him how Jack died. But the thing is, that's not really how Jack died. She tells Ennis that he was killed by a tire exploding in his face, but the real way that he died was he was murdered with a tire iron for being gay. While the way Jack died is still kind of debated, it is pretty widely accepted that he actually was killed for being gay. So on the call, Lorene tells Ennis that Jack wanted his ashes spread at Brokeback Mountain, and his ashes are with his parents. So Ennis goes and visits his parents, and it's very obvious that Jack had told them the real nature of his and Ennis's relationship. And the father is very cold, but Jack's mom allows Ennis to go up into Jack's old room, and it's in the room that he finds one of his old shirts and Jack's jacket. And this is kind of where Ennis has a little bit of a breakdown and eventually leaves Jack's parents' house. And Jack's mom was nice enough to let Ennis keep the shirts, so he takes those home with him too. So after this, Alma Jr., which is Ennis's daughter, basically comes and tells Ennis that she's getting married, and he initially says that he can't make it and that work won't allow him to, but he has a bit of a reflective moment and eventually agrees to go. And after Alma Jr. leaves, this is where the iconic moment where Ennis says, "Jack, I swear," happens, and he's pretty much just at his little shrine for Jack, because he hung up a postcard of Brokeback Mountain and hung up the shirts, and he says the words, "Jack, I swear," and then the movie ends, and that's it. And that was a very dulled down version of what the movie actually is, because there are a lot of nuances and there's a lot of details that if you are interested in it all, I definitely suggest watching it, because especially if you're a queer person, it will break something inside of you. I guarantee it. But it's a masterpiece, genuinely. Like it's an amazing movie. And like I said earlier, I truly mean that it sent me into a depressive state for like 2 days after this. And this movie affected me in a lot of different ways. It made me feel a lot of things. And some of those things were positive and some of those things were negative. Obviously, I was fucking devastated because it was just so sad. And it's not... And taking out the real life instances of things like this happening, it's just a sad movie in general. It's a tragic ending, and it's a drama, and it's just sad. But factoring in the real life instances of this happening, it's like, of course things have progressed since, the 60s, 50s, 40s. Things have progressed significantly since then. But it's still not uncommon to hear about queer people being murdered or assaulted or whatever else, just because they dared to be open about it, just because they didn't feel the need to hide it. And it's so... And this isn't even just going for queer people. This is going for anybody who is hurt or killed or anything because of shit about themselves that they can't control. It is so sad, and it's such a tragedy that we live. And this isn't even just talking about America anymore. This is talking about the world in general. It's just a tragedy that we live in a world where stuff like that happens so often. And I know so many people are just desensitized to it because of how frequently it happens. And it's like the scene where you see Ennis playing through Jack's death in his head. Even though he wasn't there, he plays through it in his head. And it flashes to scenes of his death, or what Ennis thinks his death was. And it's just gut wrenching because it's like, it makes you think, how many other people were in that position? You know? How many other people died afraid and alone, and were just violated because of who they are? And then it made me think about people like Brandon Tina. And if you don't know who Brandon Tina is, he was a trans man who was murdered in the 90s because people decided to be transphobic and kill him for it. And they made a movie about that too. And it's just like, it just makes me think of that stuff all over again, because like, of course you can dramatize something like this and make it into like a gut-wrenching, heartfelt experience, but it's also like, this is real life. Like, this is real stuff that's been happening for ever. Forever. Literally forever. And it's like, and movies like Brokeback Mountain are just tragic reminders of the things that people face every day. And it's just so sad that that's the world we live in, you know? But it also gives me so much hope. It gives me so much hope to know that there are still people out there, because even though we see all this stuff happen almost every day. Like, I don't even watch the news. I avoid the news like the plague. My anxiety just can't handle it. But of course, you know, you see things through the grapevine, or people tell you, or you see things on Twitter or whatever else. But it also gives me so much hope to know that despite seeing things like that almost daily, there are still people out there who won't let those things take away their identity or take away what they're proud of. And that fills me with more hope than anything ever could, to know that there are also people out there who will not let themselves be robbed of their identity, of who they are, of what they celebrate, of what they care about. That is fucking incredible to me. And I commend those people, because this movie also made me realize that I was becoming someone that I'm not, and I was becoming a person who did hide away from my identity and wasn't open about it. And that's no shame to anybody who feels that way, because I know that being open about it and being very loud about their identity is not for everyone, and I get that. And it's absolutely, you know, it's not always the safe thing to do, and I understand that. And that's no hate or shame or anything to anyone who feels differently and lives their life differently, because, you know, I'm never going to judge anybody for how they celebrate themselves or live their life in any way when it comes to that stuff. But I have always been a person who is very open about who they are, and who celebrates it frequently and is very proud of it and lives their authentic truth. Like, one of my values in life is truth, and that includes living my truth. And I realized from watching this movie and seeing the way that Ennis lived and was just so afraid and so wrapped up in fear, it reminded me, I saw the parallel, and I'm like, holy shit, this is what I've been doing. This is how I've been living, and I've been ignoring such a big part of myself because I'm scared, and rightfully so. Rightfully fucking so. With everything that has happened politically this year, rightfully so. It is rightful for any queer person or any minority group or any woman to feel fear after this year. I get it. I understand, because I'm right there with you. I am scared. I'm terrified. I get it. But I also realized that I let that fear ruin me. I really did. I went from someone who was so open and proud and honest to living stealth everywhere. I mean, I wouldn't even identify myself as trans on like a text post on Reddit or something like that, or like just menial stupid shit on the internet that wouldn't matter. There was just so many instances where I didn't let myself just be myself. And like I said, obviously there are situations where it's unsafe to do so, and that's entirely understandable. And I'm smart enough to know that there are situations where I shouldn't say anything. I get that. But I also just robbed myself of being proud of myself. And I have not to pat myself in the back, but I have gone through hell and high water to be the person that I am today. I have gone through so much shit to even be acknowledged as the person that I truly am. And I'm sure most of us have. I'm sure that's a shared experience. But it's like, for me personally, and this is just what I think about my own journey, to have gone through those experiences, I'm doing a disservice to myself by not living as authentically as I possibly can. And I wasn't doing that. And this movie really opened my fucking eyes to realize that it's okay to embrace who I am. And there's always going to be that fear there, and there's always going to be something out there to be afraid of. That goes for everyone. There's always going to be something out there to be afraid of. But what matters is what you do with it. Do you let it cripple you, or do you take it in stride and keep moving? And like I said, there is no hate to anyone who, has to step back and has to not be open about it and is unsafe to do so and just doesn't want to be like that. That is perfectly fine. But for me personally, it is felt like I have lost a piece of myself over the last year, ever since I watched that movie. And since then, I'm not even kidding you, I have felt like a different person since I had that revelation and watched this movie and really was able to assess that within myself and think about it and just address it with myself. Because it's like, damn, when I'm in the space of being who I am, there is so many good things happening for me. You know, content for the internet is coming in. I'm getting, I got a job opportunity that's really aligned for me and really aligned with, you know, being myself and being open about that and letting people know. And it's like, when I'm living in that space, it's like, holy shit, there is nothing like it. And I'm glad that I watched this movie when I did, because I was really going through a little bit of a crisis. Like, I was going through a crisis of like, holy shit, I don't know who I am anymore. And I know it might be dumb to say that a movie kind of fixed that for me, but it's like, it's true. It really changed a lot of things for me, and it gave me this different perspective of living my life as a queer person. And it just like, I don't know, it's like, it just changed something. And it made me realize that, like, I was taking that fear and changing it into something that I didn't want it to be. And it's so hard to have that point of view on it, though. Like, it feels hopeless to take the fear in stride and just keep going. It absolutely does. It feels so hopeless when things are just thrown out every other day about queer people or trans people or whatever else. Like, it just feels so hopeless. And it's so much easier, to just let the fear take over. Hell yeah, it is. It's not fun to have to sit here and face any of that and keep pushing and pushing and pushing despite everything that's going on. God damn, it sucks sometimes. But it's like, I don't know. It's just, I mean, it's unfortunate that we even have to make that choice. It's unfortunate that there's even anything for us to be afraid of, or anything for us to fight against, or anything for us to, or anything to oppose us in general. It sucks, but it's like, I don't know, there's always that choice, and like I said, there's no hate to anybody who is crippled by that fear, because I get it. We'd be lacking a huge self-awareness to not be crippled by that fear. And I fully feel for and am standing with and sympathize and empathize with anybody who is in that position right now. And I get it. We need to take care of ourselves in times like this. And it's just, now more than ever is a time where we need to step back from the internet sometimes. Where we need to just step back and maybe just exist in our own bubble for a little bit. And there's no shame in that. There's not an ounce of shame in that. If that's what you need to do, please do it. Because what is more important right now is that we, as queer folks and just LGBTQ folks in general, are taking care of ourselves. And that goes for anybody who has been who is under attack right now. You know, any minority group, any woman, anybody. It is so important that we take the time to take care of ourselves in times like this, because there is so much of ourselves that we have to give to get to a point of being safe and being acknowledged, that it's so very easy to just get lost in all that. And I understand that. Like, there is no shame in taking some time away from the internet, or doing whatever you need to do to get in a place where you feel okay. There is no shame in that whatsoever. But like I said, it's just unfortunate that we even have anything to have to fight against or stand against or whatever else or speak against or show up against or anything like that. It's just it's unfortunate. There's no other word that I can really say. It's just it's not right. And it's a disgusting use of our political system, truly. So Brokeback Mountain, it really put a lot of things in in terms of living as a queer person, an openly queer person, into perspective, and it was kind of a double-edged sword for me because you have the option to live like Ennis and be fearful and let that rob you of being your true self, or you have the option to live like Jack and risk being yourself, being the reason why you're not here anymore. And that's a really fucked up reality that queer people have to face. But sometimes, depending on the situation, that is the reality. And it's like, how do you mesh those together to be safe, but also have the opportunity to live as your true self and express yourself and show up in this life exactly how you want to? It's a very precarious balancing act, especially depending on what country you live in or state or whatever else. It's a very precarious balancing act of health and safety versus health and safety, honestly, because a lot of people just experience a dip in mental health and physical well-being when they're not able to live their true selves, but they could also do that for being open about it. And it's just this fine line of how safe do I want to be versus how open do I want to be, and how open can I be while still being safe. And this movie just put so much of that into a new perspective for me, and just made me realize that I want to be open and loud and proud. And that's not even just for myself. I want to do that for people who can't be open or who are not comfortable being open. I want to use my voice to uplift others. And, even if one person can see that in me and can be able to use my voice as theirs, I've done exactly what I want to do, and I've done exactly what I'm here to do. And it doesn't matter to me if it's 101 people or 100 people or 1,000 people or 100,000 people. It's just if even one person can see that and can feel something with what I have to say and can feel something with how I live my life and who I am, then I've accomplished everything that I want to. That's it. That's all I care about. And I'm just so passionate about helping the queer community in any way that I can. And whether it's uplifting someone else or being a voice for other people, I'll do whatever I can to help uplift this community and keep this community safe and continue to let this community grow into the amazing, blooming flower that it absolutely is. So, as you can tell, Brokeback Mountain has had a huge impact on me as an openly queer and trans person. And there is something I wanted to get into about Jack's death, and this is a post I saw. I'm not sure what the platform was, but it was a post I saw, a comment I saw about the movie, and I'm going to read it for you. Jack Twist's death was apparently listed as an accident by the original author because that is what Lorene was having to tell people. Lorene knew that Jack was gay. She says to the other woman at dinner that her husband never wanted to dance either, meaning that he was not interested in her sexually. Lorene knew Jack was seeing a man named Ennis regularly. She also knew he would go out to meet other men for sex. She said to Ennis that she had told Jack not to drink, which is commit the act of homosexual sex. She says Jack drank often. She had tears in her eyes as she said these words. She connected with Ennis in that moment because she knew this Ennis guy and Jack were wanting to be together but couldn't. She felt the same as Ennis. They each loved Jack but couldn't have him fully. Jack cheated on them both with other men. They were each sad that Jack had died, but also angry with him for cheating because he did not heed their warnings that being openly gay would get him killed. Obviously, Ennis was devastatingly saddened at perceptibly knowing how Jack truly died. Lorene had to concoct a lie because of it. She told the lie to Ennis as she had stated it many times before to others, but she knew Ennis understood what had truly happened to Jack. He was brutally beaten to death. I wanted to bring that up because that scene, the scene where Lorene is on the phone with Ennis, is particularly impactful because it's just, like I said, it shows flashes of how Ennis um, actually thinks Jack died. And it's just like, it's such a harrowing moment. And it's one of those moments where you feel sick to your stomach. And I genuinely did. I was a wreck by that point, and I was just so like disheveled. And it's one of those moments in cinema where you can't feel anything other than devastated. Whether you liked this character or not, whether you liked the movie or not, you cannot help but feel anything other than sad. And there's a tone of that throughout the whole movie because Jack and Ennis's love and affection for each other is very aggressive. And I know that was done for a reason because there is so much emotion put into it, and there's the aggression of repressing those feelings and the aggression of a lack of self-acceptance and shame and just so many negative feelings wrapped up to him but into it, but also this amalgamation of positivity because they feel this love for each other and this connection with one another and this deep rooted need and want to be with one another. And it's just like, it's almost a full circle moment because their love started with aggression and it ended with aggression. It started with the aggression of love and shame and anger and fear, and it ended with the aggression of fear and hate and ignorance and the sheer lack of understanding for another human being. So it's just like this whole full circle moment of their aggressive love had an unfortunate aggressive end. And it's just like, even though it's a tragic, horrible end, it wraps the whole movie up in this little bow. And something that I love so much about this movie is that it's not just a movie for queer people. And while I think those movies are incredibly important, this movie was a movie that straight people and cis people could relate to. And they could see themselves in Jack and Ennis because I'm sure they had an instance of forbidden love too. You know, for whatever reason, I'm sure people could see parts of themselves in their relationship, and I'm sure people could see parts of themselves in both characters because all of us have something that we're afraid to let other people know, or that we're ashamed of, or that we're scared to be seen for, and that we're scared to be seen as. And then there's the other side where we all have something that we want to be celebrated, and that we want to be seen, and that we want people to love us for. And those are usually the same thing on both ends of the spectrum. So this was a movie and characters that not just queer people could relate to, but also people who are cis or straight or whatever else. People outside of these specific characters could see that. And like I said, I think it's very important to have movies that just queer people can relate to. But I think at the time that this was released and the state of the world at the time, it was so important to have something that so many people and such a huge population of people could see. And because people could relate to this movie, they could also have the experience of understanding what it was like to be a queer person, whether it was relating to them back in the 60s when this movie was set or to 2005 when it actually came out. This gave straight people and cis people the opportunity to actually understand and relate to LGBTQ plus people, even if it wasn't on the same exact wavelength or in the same exact way. And it kind of bridged that gap between so many different people who might not have been able to relate in other ways had this movie not come out. So I think it did incredible things for really giving a realistic depiction of what being queer could mean. And I think it really just showed so much raw emotion and so much of what it really was like back then. And it's so important because it wasn't just a shallow depiction either. It was a heartbreaking, groundbreaking, devastating, world-changing depiction of that. And I feel like that is the kind of thing that the community continually needs, but definitely needed in times where things were not as progressed as they were now. So I think it did so much for bridging that gap, and it kind of just made people realize that we all are human and we all have so many of the same experiences, even if they're at their core different. We all have so many experiences that we can relate to one another on, and obviously I wouldn't know because I was 6 when this movie was released, but I think that it had the opportunity to bring the world a hell of a lot closer than it was, and I think a lot of media like this continues to do that in a really positive way that we desperately need in a time like this. And there's something else I wanted to talk about too. I saw somebody, again, I can't remember what website it was, but somebody commented about how they thought the movie was really good and a masterpiece, but they didn't like how aggressive their love was, and they didn't like that it had a tragic ending. And I get that. It would have been much nicer had they been able to actually live out their dreams and elope to Mexico and have a ranch together. But I think if it were a happy ending, I don't think as many people would have been as deeply impacted as they were. And I don't think it would have been as renowned of a movie had it actually had a happy ending. I mean, the whole point of the tragedy was to show what could happen to queer people and what was a very real possibility and what still is a very real possibility for queer people. And I think the differences in Jack and Ennis, I think it needed to end that way, or else it would not have been half as impactful as it actually was. And I think there would have been so much lost. And I think it still would have been an amazing movie and still would have been really groundbreaking. But I also think it would have lost so much of the relatability and so much of the ability to bridge the gap between cis people and straight people and queer people and trans people. I think it would have missed out on that so much. Now, would I have loved to see them have a happy ending? Yes, I think about it frequently, and I'm on the brink of just writing a happy ending myself at this point because I would have loved to see my gay cowboys have their happy ending. But I don't think it personally would have been as impactful for me if they would have had the happy ending, because I don't think I would have had the realizations that I did had they had a happy ending. And maybe in a different universe they do, but I'm while it was tragic and horrible, I'm appreciative of the ending that was given, and that the message that was supposed to send. Massive kudos to this movie in general. It was incredible. And if you haven't watched it, if you're interested in it at all, I definitely suggest watching it. Um, you will cry, whether you're cis, trans, straight, gay, pan, bi, doesn't matter. You will cry, and you will feel something. And it's just an amazing movie. It's just incredible, and I truly cannot recommend it enough. I could talk about it for another hour, but it is truly something special. It is a very special movie. I personally have yet to see a movie that impacted me that much, especially as a queer person. But yeah, it's great, and if you want to watch it, if you're interested in the slightest, please do yourself a favor and go watch it. There are some very it's kind of cutaway scenes, but there are scenes of people being beaten and murdered, and it has its moments of being very very triggering for some people, because there are moments of violence. Just Jack and Ennis fight, and there are moments of violence against women, like against Alma and everything. So just a trigger warning if you do decide to watch it, because it gets very hard to watch at some point. If you are interested in watching it, I definitely suggest doing so. And if you go on doesthedogdie.com and search up Brokeback Mountain, it will give you a list of all the trigger warnings. I'm not sure if it has timestamps, but people can be people are pretty specific about when it happens in the movie. So if any of that stuff is triggering to you and you still want to watch it, I definitely suggest that website. And I suggest that for any movie that you watch, because people, like I said, will pretty much tell you exactly where it happens, so you can avoid it. But that's a really good resource for triggering content in movies. And I think maybe TV shows too. I'm not entirely sure, but definitely movies. But yeah, anyway, if you're all still here, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate the fact that I have the place to be able to do this, and the privilege to be able to speak about things like this and anything that I want to, essentially. And I'm just very grateful that people are listening and relating and having these conversations with me, and I appreciate that so much. Thank you for listening to me rant about gay cowboys for I don't know how long this episode's gonna be, but thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Even if you don't comment, I so deeply appreciate any contribution to this conversation or anyone listening to what I have to say, because I'm just some dude on the internet. So I appreciate it deeply. Even though it was kind of sad and morbid. If you like this episode, please feel free to maybe like the video, subscribe if you want to, maybe give me a follow on Twitch. All of my socials and additional information will be down in the description below. But yeah, thank you all again for watching, and I will see you all next week. Bye!